in Brighton on April the 15th and Bristol on April the 29th. Well, in churches, temples and mosques, they preach about the dangers of sin and the rewards of keeping to the path of righteousness. But not all religious people are good, not all good people are religious. There have been many humanitarians and philanthropists who are agnostic or atheist, from the philosophers, the aforementioned David Hume, John Stuart Mill, to Microsoft's Bill Gates. The list is long. Do we need religion to create a moral society? Dr. Stephen Lowe, do we need... Stephen Law, I do beg your pardon. Do we need religion to create a moral society? That's the question.
Yeah, I don't believe so, no. If you look at China, for about 2 millennia, it was a very moral place. Their morality was based on Confucianism, which is a secular, non-religious doctrine. And yet you find more or less the same moral codes. You find the Golden Rule, do as you would be done by, for example. Confucius, that was his message too, not just Jesus. So you find societies that are very moral, that have similar levels of morality to religious societies, such as Europe under Christianity. So it's just a straightforward counterexample to the claim that you can't have a moral society without a religious foundation.
So does morality predate religion?
I don't know, you'll have to ask a scientist. An evolutionary. I think they both clearly have deep roots in our history, and to some extent it looks as if there's a genetic component perhaps to both of those tendencies that we have to be moral and to lean towards religion.
To be pattern seekers, yes. Yeah. Bishop David, do you believe morality comes from God?
Yeah. I do, but then I believe in God. So clearly that people who want to live a moral life or create a moral framework can choose to do so without God. What is needed is a framework that human beings flourish, and we know this from our vulnerability as tiny children, with a framework, and that there is some basic understandings of right and wrong, of what is true, what is not true, what is the right way to treat with each other. We've touched on that already.
But as we establish week after week, one person's morality is another person's bigotry.
And this is a very common problem today, that we start to make it up as we go along. And it's interesting to talk about Confucianism and the Chinese government's present interest in understanding what is the framework that a human being who's now entered into the free market, who's now trying to aspire to their own house, to their own family life, what is the moral framework? And that's why Christianity is booming in China at the moment, for example, because people seek not only just their ordinary physical and safety needs, but they also need spiritual nourishment. And so the roots of much of our morality today are, of course, and we talked about the law courts as well this morning, are rooted in an understanding that we need a framework, and that people connect that up not just with logic and measurable things, but also with the things of the spirit.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think that what's most important is that we produce good citizens. And the kind of citizen that I would want to hold up as a model would be, say, the kind of citizens who rescued Jews during the Holocaust. Now, research has been done into the backgrounds of those individuals, and it turns out that what really motivated those individuals was not religious belief, in fact. They didn't appear to be much more religious than those that didn't rescue. What marks out the rescuers from the non-rescuers is that they were raised to think and question and think about things from the other points of view.
To do the right thing for the right reasons.
Yeah, certainly to discuss openly and not just uncritically and passively accept whatever they were told. Now, you can raise children like that within a religious setting. It's not incompatible with religion, but you can also do it outside of a religious setting. And it turns out it doesn't matter very much whether you do it inside religion or outside, as long as you're doing that. That's the most important thing.
Khola Hasan, do you believe a fear of God is necessary?
Not necessarily. I mean, I actually agree with Stephen that you used the word genetic. Maybe there's a genetic component that we believe as Muslims that God has actually created human beings with moral understanding within them. So we know certain things are not right, certain things are wrong. So we do have that moral compass within us that we are born with. But human beings and our rationale, which is wonderful, our intellect is wonderful, but it's fallible. We are, swayed by things around us. And if we look at the way society today has become so consumer-driven and so obsessive about happily wasting the world's resources. And, you know, there was a time when our intellect told us it's perfectly okay for a white person to treat a black person as inferior because a black person is inferior. And that was our intellect, that we can treat a woman...
Slavery wasn't a monopoly of white people, though. There's been slavery since time immemorial.
The point is about intellect. That the intellect told us it's perfectly acceptable to treat women as
slavery is mentioned in the Quran, it's mentioned in the Bible.
It's not just mentioned, it is overtly allowed within these texts. So it's not certainly within the Bible. So, and that's another part of the Old Testament that somehow gets revised so that we can ignore that whilst paying attention to Leviticus 20. The reality is that I'm not suggesting that we don't owe some debt to, especially Abrahamic religions, for disseminating some very general ideas of what I think are basic humanist principles, and making people who perhaps would not otherwise have obeyed them, obey them. But the fact is now, if we're saying, do we need religion now to be a moral society? I think that would suggest that we are somehow regressive creatures, that we are, instead of evolving, we're going backwards. No, we do not need that.
We are going backwards.
Michael?
We are going backwards. Look at society. Look at our youngsters.
I would need something more specific than that.
Do you want me to give you specifics, do you?
Yes.
Okay, you look at the rate of youngsters what are now got no husbands, no father figures. The kids what are on our streets who are having children. It says in the Bible that children will start having children.
Can you point to a better time, Michael?
Because they're leaning away from what the Bible would.
But are we suggesting...
Hang on, Michael, can you point to a better time than now, a golden age, when things were better and there was proper adherence to what you believe in, and society was resultantly better?
A lot of for instance, my grandparents' age, a lot of them, you know, they've been married, you know, the best part of 50, 60 years. They've had one partner. The children are all, you know, they've got the mother there, they've got the dad there, they're married. It's in the convenience of the church. It's consecrated by God, and because of their upbringings of the mother and the father, the child's got a better chance of striving. Well, I'm not saying that single parents are going to be struggling to bring up their child, but what I do say is that if you are married and you have your son and or your daughter, and you've got a father and your mother, then you've got a better chance of striving.
John?
I'm not sure that there's any statistics that suggest that Christians are somehow staying married more than atheists, for example, if that's what we're suggesting, or secular people. I don't think that's the case. Yes, of course, some of the things you're saying are true, but the idea that the only variable between the time when every family was together and there were picket fences and moderate wealth for everybody, and this time now of near Armageddon that's being suggested, is just the decline of religion. That it's not. There are so many other factors.
Of course they are.
But don't you agree that...
Miriam was
I just wanted to come back to something that Khola and Stephen were touching on, which is that morals can be exceeded by the use of reason. And in fact, in Islam, the use of critical reason is very much encouraged. The difference is that you've got no way to then ground that within society and the individual. And that's where religion plays a role, because through ritual, it connects the individual to broader society. When you pray, you reconnect with those godly values, which are the universal values of morality. When you fast, you think about poor people. All of these rituals, charity, you think about your connectedness to others. All of these rituals are there to connect you to other people. And all the research suggests that, actually, research by Putnam recently, religious institutions, religious organizations are much better at creating civic networks. The Oxford Handbook of Religion recently showed that religious Americans are much better at being civic activists, at voting, at giving to charity.
So is that a moral society? Because it's the most religious society in the Western world. Is that a particular paragon of morality, America?
See, one of these things, you can't, well, sociologists generally find it very difficult to measure religiosity of a society. Well,
you can measure the USA is the most religious society in the Western world.
That's one sociological definition. What's much easier to measure is self-proclaimed religiosity. So how much you attend church, how often you give to charity, how often you pray, and that is very much connected with civic activism and looking after others. It's no surprise that 1 in 10 young people in Britain today feel that they have no responsibility for the elderly. That religious people feel that because they connect
there's a lot to respond to in there, and some of it's right. I think it's true. The religion. None of it. We'll get to the bits that are not right in a minute. I mean,
cut to the chase, Stephen.
Yeah. So, religion is actually a very good social adhesive. It's quite good at binding people together into communities, and no one wants to deny that. However, it's also true, for example, that if you run philosophy for children programs in schools, those children are also transformed. They become far more moral, far more interested in interacting with each other.
It's the long term we're
so you
talking
can build
about.
communities using religion, or you can build communities without using religion. The thing about the philosophical approach, let me finish. The thing about the philosophical approach is that everyone is included. You don't have the effect of different religions. As they bind people together, they produce divisions between those communities.
That's an assumption you're making. In Islam, we say very much, someone is either your equal in faith or they're your brother in humanity. We don't, those distinctions that you're
Susan
making
wants to
don't
come in
apply
here.
when you
Susan?
get to
I'm just going to say, I like what you're saying, but I don't agree with it, actually, because if you look, if we took religion out of it, then it would be one man's word over another man's word of what morality is. You could state that you think this is moral, and then I could state something else.
There's a really good example of that, what we were
put.
talking about earlier on, which is you think all Muslim women should wear the hijab, for example. Right, it's a lady there who doesn't. So is she being immoral?
No, I don't think so.
But you told me earlier on it was a sin, not...
But this is my personal belief, and that's her personal... I'm not her. I don't know how she thinks. I don't know how she feels. I don't know her life story. I don't know when she was born, where she was born. I don't even know her full name. I don't know her age.
All women should wear the hijab. That's an example of exactly what you were saying about one person's morality.
But I also believe that women who have some disability that can't wear the hijab shouldn't wear the hijab, and I think there are plenty of reasons why that should be. I mean, this is my personal belief that I don't believe in enforcing it on anybody.
And that's the point. That's where we get back to it. Most religions are actually involved in civic networks in which they're helping to feed the poor, look after the elderly. They're buttressing where the state is actually failing us, and without them we'd be a lot poorer.
They're also massively involved in politics, in which case they also do things like try and prevent gay people from adopting, trying to stop them from having codified relationships, etc., etc. So it's not just this benign activity.
Anthony?
The question is slightly flawed in that...
Oh, sorry about that.
I agree with you.
Because, does religion bring a more moral society? Well, even if it does, do we always want to have a more moral society if you're then condemning people you consider to be immoral to be out of society? In other words, one person's definition of morality is another person's immorality. In other words,
that's true whether it's religious
during the
or not.
Crusades, the Crusades for morality persecuted, killed lots of people who were deemed to be immoral. In a born-again Christian sense, homosexuality is immoral. In my view, some of the most moral people I've ever met in my life have been homosexuals.
I'm not saying I've got a problem.
Well, let's not go back to that. We've kind of been there. But there is a point. I mean, Khola, you can address this one. There's a point that we look at the history of religion, and it is drenched in blood, and it's drenched in humanity. The Middle East is all about ancient religious claims to a strip of land.
It's all about politics, it's all about gas, it's about oil. And Stalin and Mao... Yes, it is. Stalin and Mao were not religious people.
So it's nothing to do with religion. John Amaechi.
It is fair to say that there is a tremendous amount of politics, but what's amazing to me is that on the one hand, religion is this powerful, amazing entity, and on the other hand, the moment anything bad happens within it, that's politics. No, you have to take some responsibility. You asked before, what's the difference between a moral structure that has God at the top of it and one that doesn't? The difference is when God is your superego, when God is that person on your shoulder backing you up with everything you say, all of a sudden your words have double, maybe more, the impact.
Well, actually, your words cultivate humility.
Bishop David.
John, as usual, has a much greater insight into the Almighty than perhaps I do. But
I would not
much.
I haven't seen you play basketball.
Bigger relationship. No, I prefer rugby. But the main thing about this agenda is that human beings need to live together in harmony. They need to see creative flourishing, whoever they are, whatever their background, colour, creed, and at the same time, we need to allow for the flourishing of that extraordinary thing in human beings which seeks the other, which seeks the numinous. The description of love, for example, is extremely difficult to measure, but raises the spirit. Christians find that love in the person of Jesus, face to face, and also in the ability to sort things out when things go wrong. We've mentioned all sorts of negative things today. That is one of the basic experiences of human beings, and therefore the ability to be forgiven and to know you're forgiven, to know that you can forgive in order to pick up and move on, is at the heart of many people's religious practice.
What about those people who are, you know, unarguably wonderful people, altruistic people, but do it not because there is a creator or they believe there is a creator, but do it just because they think it's the right thing to do?
I say praise the Lord, and
but they don't. They don't say praise the Lord.
Therefore, an understanding, a Christian understanding of God, is as we say, is big enough to encompass the whole
those people too.
cosmos.
Stephen, you want a final word?
Yeah, I think that each one of us ultimately has the responsibility for making our own moral decisions, and we need the inner resources to fall back on to make those kind of decisions.
And religion can help us.
And I have no problem with religion whatsoever in terms of providing guidance, but you need to reflect on it and ultimately make your own decision. You should not treat your religion as a moral compass that you must always follow blindly and unthinkingly.
Moral compass, I haven't heard that word for a couple of years. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. Next week we're in Bury. Thank you so much for watching. For now, it's goodbye from everybody here at